How would a state-on-state war unfold today? Russia versus NATO. Let's check out this video and see what they've got to say. You can check out the original video in the description. And if you want to continue to support the channel, then please do like, share and subscribe. Check out our merch over at combatreadyhq.co.uk. Link is in the description. Check out the best supplements on the market. Combat Fuel. Use code CH15 for 15% off. Looking forward to seeing what they've got to say about this. But let's get into it.
The Strategic Defence Review was all part of what the government says is Britain transitioning to a state of war readiness. So what would a state-on-state war involving NATO look like in 2025? Well, first, it'll obviously be significantly different from even modern 20th century conflicts like the Gulf War, Iraq or Afghanistan. This would involve far more advanced military tech.
Too right. Afghanistan, fighting people in mountains, fighting people in a local population that don't wear uniform, don't sort of carry the standard sort of weapon systems that you would see most nations have today. Didn't have armour, didn't have air, didn't have artillery. Completely different to Afghanistan. Iraq, a little bit more so, but Afghanistan, completely different.
Cyber and grey zone operations, and come with the risk of nuclear escalation. And it could of course spread to other parts of the world if China, for instance, took advantage of the chaos. So how much...
Quick question. Do you think it would go nuclear? Do you think China would ever get involved? China would have become this great superpower, didn't they? They want to run the economics of the world, okay? That currency, they want all the gold, okay? They want to be that number one above the USA. Putin always threatening to take it a little bit further, always threatening to press that nuclear button. Would he ever press it? I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Things start? Well, the most likely scenario at the moment, one NATO is focused on, is that Russia launches some sort of multi-front invasion into the Baltics, using Belarus as a staging ground. Germany's Chief of Defence, General Carsten Brewer, has predicted Russia could attack a NATO Baltic state by the end of the decade, particularly if the US withdraws some of the 85,000 American troops currently stationed in Europe.
Mental. 85,000 troops, okay, in Europe. That's more than the entire British Army, currently sitting at 74,000 personnel. Regular. That's what they've got stationed in Europe. This is the footprint the US have around the world. And this is why they will be such a struggle to defeat someone like the US. One, the kit and equipment they have, the technology they have, but just the amount of response teams, basically, let's put it this way, the amount of footings, placings they've got around the world that they can respond to any situation anywhere around at a moment's notice. Putin, multi-stage attack, okay, on different fronts. Don't think he can do it. All these efforts going into Ukraine. Has he got the tanks, the armoured personnel carriers, the fuel, the rations, the food and the personnel to really carry out something like that? Me personally, I don't think so, but I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Europe. And this is where he believes it could happen. This is the Suwalki Gap, a 40-mile corridor that links Russia via Belarus with the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, a tiny pocket of Russian territory on the Baltic coast. If the Russians sever this, they'd effectively cut off the Baltic states from the rest of Europe. So how might this unfold? Well, as a precursor, Russia might launch cyber attacks on the Baltic states to crash their banking systems, their communication networks, and their energy infrastructure. NATO does have what's been called a tripwire force in the Baltics of around 5,000 troops, but a study back in 2016 concluded they would probably be quickly overrun by the sheer mass of the Russian army. And Russian forces,
yes, they do have the sheer mass, but have they got the actual current personnel to do that? Possibly not. They are running low on supplies and personnel. Cyber attacks, very, very likely though. Always happening. If you don't believe it, then you're just a moron, okay? They're constantly trying to attack the UK's defences, the US and other nations within Europe. Okay, trying to hack into our systems, trying to hack into mobile phones, whether that's soldiers, civilians, state, government. They are always testing us and trying to gather intelligence. So for them to possibly hack it one day and take down, I don't know, our banking system, our energy grids is very, very likely.
Estonia and Latvia within 60 hours. But that, of course, was before Ukraine and the enormous losses Russia has suffered. Right now, that wouldn't be the case, but Russia is rearming, And the thinking is that by the end of this decade, they'll have rebuilt their army enough to make that scenario possible again. So if they did invade, the Russians would probably mine the Baltic ports, as they've done in Ukraine, to stop any sort of amphibious assault. At the same time, the Kremlin might strike NATO bases and airfields in Poland, Germany and Lithuania with cruise missiles and drones. One of the Baltic states, probably Lithuania, would quickly invoke Article 5, the principle of collective defence. Then NATO would be at war.
That could be a possibility. We know they've got access to thousands and thousands of drones, so that is a possibility. Once again, though, rebuilding their army. Personally, yes, they are possibly looking to rebuild, but where are they going to get the numbers from? Where are they getting this money from? I know Putin can draw in from all, his high net worth friends within Russia, but Ukraine has taken out of him. The war wasn't meant to go on this long. So personally, could he rebuild and continue the Ukraine-Russian war? I don't think so. But could he get allies in to help? That is a massive possibility. North Korea, China, there is a chance that they could join him to help bolster. But then would they want another world war? It's all, who knows? It's all guessing games, really.
First unit NATO would deploy would be the Allied Reaction Force, a 10,000 strong multinational army that NATO says can be quickly scaled to 300,000 troops if needed.
That's a huge difference, isn't it? 10,000 to 300,000. You can go from 10 to 300,000. But 10,000 straight away, out the door, go and secure an airfield, deploy troops, secure a little area, and then let 290,000 more come in, would be brilliant.
At the same time, the skies above the Baltics would be flooded with NATO jets. At this point, Kaliningrad, sandwiched between Poland and Lithuania, and already bristling with Iskander missile launches, becomes particularly important for Moscow because it gives the Kremlin a launch site right in the heart of the war zone. Russia could even up the ante by moving tactical nuclear weapons to Kaliningrad. That in turn could prompt the US and NATO allies to move their own nuclear forces to a higher state of readiness, possibly DEFCON 3, 2 steps from all-out nuclear war. At sea, NATO's navies would increase their presence in the North Atlantic, the Baltics and the Mediterranean to secure vital supply routes. While on the ground,
obviously that would be massive, and the big ones there would be someone like Sweden, knows the Baltic region extremely well, understands the waters. Okay, so this is where countries like Sweden, Finland, Norway really come into play.
There would be intense land battles with NATO tanks like British Challengers, US Abrams and German Leopards facing Russian T-80s and T-90s.
And that is one thing you wouldn't want to be a part of. Highly technical and armoured tanks going at it, woodblock to woodblock, armour-piercing rounds, firing on the move. That would get messy and it would be extremely hard. I would see mass casualties, a mass amount of tanks being taken out if it was an all-out war with tanks going at it.
Went on, we could see US bombers based in the UK hitting Russian supply depots in Belarus and NATO jets striking deep into Russian territory.
This is where it gets a bit complicated. Yes, you may see Russian jets possibly trying to take out NATO bases, but you've got to win the skies. Russia's air force up against NATO's air force, I don't think it stands a chance, especially if the US get involved. Even the UK, we've got quite a few amount of jets, Sweden, Germany, and other nations as well. You've got to win the skies. If you win the skies, you can definitely win the war, possibly. But I think it's extremely hard for Russia to win the skies.
It would be a technological conflict, with both sides putting into practice lessons from Ukraine. Drones would feature heavily, along with electronic warfare, to try and suppress each other's air defence systems and command nodes. There might be cyber attacks on power grids, hospitals and government IT systems. Banking and communication networks in NATO countries would also be a target, along with satellites and GPS.
Too right, cyber's a massive one, something we've seriously got to be scared of or worry about. Not really scared of, but you've got to have it in your mind.
Nearly 20% of the UK economy depends on satellites, and around £8 billion of UK GDP would be lost if satellite navigation services went down for just a week. The other thing we'd see would be attacks in the so-called grey zone, things like disinformation campaigns to try and stir up unrest in NATO countries. If this was a war between NATO and Russia, there would be the risk of nuclear escalation. Most alliance members don't have nuclear weapons, but the US, UK, France, and of course Russia do. If Vladimir Putin thought his regime was threatened, if NATO tanks were heading towards Moscow, the risk of Russia launching a nuclear strike would certainly increase.
It would. It would. And do I think he would do it if he was on his last legs and he thought he was going to lose and he'd just like, absolute, who cares? Let's go after it. I'm going to give you everything I've got because I'm going to lose anyway. Yes. There was tanks just rolling into Russia, most probably not, because once you press that button, there's no going back. And if you press that button and you launch one, you're going to have a hell of a lot coming towards you as well. Is it worth it? No. Hopefully he doesn't. If he's on his last legs and Moscow's about to be lost and he's about to cop it, then possibly. Possibly. That's the scary thing.
And then there's the civilian cost of any state-on-state conflict. Thousands, possibly millions of refugees would flow from the Baltics, which would put enormous pressure on neighbouring countries and their economies. And the end game of all this? Well, militarily, the 32 NATO members have a huge conventional military power, but they also have shortages of ammunition, defence industries that aren't that integrated, and not enough air defence cover. Russia has surged its military spending to 6% of GDP.
Oh, pretty big. 6%. They're putting a lot of money into funding now.
Quadrupling its defence budget.
Wow.
And Vladimir Putin has enlarged the Russian military to 1.5 million personnel. But that's still 2 million less than NATO can muster. Russia has around 5,000 aircraft. The alliance has 22,000 of them.
That's what I mean, trying to win the skies. You'd be going up against a mighty air force.
NATO's tank stocks run to 11,500. Russia has around half that number.
But it shows you how much kit and equipment Russia has. Like, they are not messing around. A lot of it is old and outdated, but that is a lot of planes and tanks for one nation and a lot of personnel.
Conventional war against Russia, the alliance would quickly prevail. Better training, better weapons, better command structures. But it could be very costly. Military experts put the loss rates in modern peer-to-peer warfare at 1 to 2,000 a day. Based on a 3-to-1 wound-to-kill ratio and taking into account Russian losses in Ukraine against superior Western weaponry, 3 weeks of heavy combat could cost the lives of 18,000 NATO soldiers and 35,000 Russians.
Mad when you think just over 400 personnel, UK personnel, were killed in the whole entire war in Afghan.
Tens of thousands of civilians could also die through missile strikes and urban fighting. So it would be devastating, but that of course is a conventional war. The one area Russia does match the West is its nuclear arsenal. Cornered and at risk of losing power, Vladimir Putin could push the button on tactical nukes, and that would take things into a whole new realm.
Literally, a whole new realm that you cannot come back from. End of it all. Pointless. Start firing them at each other. But it's not just the casualties, you know, the military casualties, it's the civilian casualties as well. That would be millions if we had an all-out state-on-state war Russia between NATO and Russia. It'd be devastating. But very interesting video. I really enjoyed this. Go and check out the video in the description. Go and subscribe to him. Subscribe to Combat Ready HQ. Don't forget, click that button now. Turn notifications bell on. And I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.